Before we dive into this discussion, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This debate quickly turns into a heated exchange between Alan Dershowitz and Joe Kent over the conflict involving Iran and the broader direction of U.S. foreign policy. As tensions rise, the conversation expands to include Piers Morgan, accusations of anti-Semitism, and sharp disagreements over the issues at hand. It's a fast-moving debate with plenty of strong opinions. So let's watch the key moments and then break down the arguments from both sides.
I think just in general, Americans, especially the Americans who voted for Donald Trump, who represent the majority of Republicans, are sick and tired of having these discussions about foreign countries, whether it's Israel or anyone else. But Israel right now has an outsized influence on our foreign policy in the Middle East, which has catapulted us into this current conflict with Iran, which helped drive us into the tragic Iraq war. So look, I think Americans want our government to focus on our problems here in America. Drive around any American city, you're going to see poverty, despair. Those are the issues that people want to focus on. They don't want to focus on, who's running the Israeli cabinet or what the foreign policy preferences are of the Israeli government to drive us into the next series of conflicts. So I think that's why you're seeing so many people who came out and voted for President Trump when he campaigned on putting American interests first. I don't think we need to get rid of any kind of, relationship that we have with Israel. I don't think this is an Israeli versus Palestinian issue. I think what happens between the Israelis and the Palestinians is, quite frankly, their business. I think most Americans would agree. I think we just need to have normal relations with Israel like we would with any other country. But right now, our relationship with Israel is so off balanced that you are seeing a lot of people putting this issue front and center because the war in Iran and the wars in the Middle East for the last 2 decades plus have consumed so much blood, so much treasure, and just so much attention from our leaders that many people, especially on the Republican side, are saying this is out of whack. We need our leaders to prioritize us. And I think that's what you're going to see in the next election cycle, not just the midterms, but especially as we have an open primary in 2028 for the presidency.
I don't disagree with that. Let me make one correction. Let me make one correction, please, and that is Israel was opposed to the United States getting into the Iraq war. I know that. I was in the office of Prime Minister Sharon when he personally told me that he had spoken to President Bush and had urged him not to send American troops into Iraq. Israel was opposed to the Iraq war. It is in favor of trying to get regime change in Iran because Iran is existentially threatening the existence of Israel. But when it comes to Iraq, that's very, very different. And Israel has been a great ally of the United States. And over the years, it's been one of the few people that the United States can count on for everything. And the major function that the United States has had recently is to stop Israel. It stopped Israel when it bombed the nuclear reactors and told Israel it has to stop. Israel wanted to continue. When it had its ceasefire recently, it demanded that Israel stop its war in Lebanon. So the United States has been a brake on Israel. And so Israel hasn't really influenced the United States. The United States has much more influenced the activities, even the self-defense activities of Israel.
But Alan, I would say, I just don't think that's right when it comes to the Iran war, because we know from the big New York Times deep dive last week that Benjamin Netanyahu, on his 7th or 8th trip to the White House in a matter of months, sat in the Situation Room at the White House with the head of Mossad joining on the big screen and sold Donald Trump the idea that there was a chance to decapitate the leadership in Iran, and that as a result, the IRGC would collapse from within, the people would rise up, and they'd all be too distracted to even think about the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the first bit happened, and there's no doubt the Americans, I think, joined in at the behest of Netanyahu, because we heard it come out of Marco Rubio's mouth. He said the reason American forces preemptively struck in Iran.
Then he withdrew that.
But I tend to believe what the Secretary of State in America says publicly when he's first asked, rather than when he's told what he should be saying.
I do too, but it's a more nuanced story than that.
Alan,
the Prime Minister of Israel doesn't tell Israel what to do.
Hang on. Yeah. But Marco Rubio is not a stupid man. He's probably the most competent person in that entire cabinet.
He's
knew
brilliant.
What he was saying.
I think he's terrific.
He made it.
Yeah.
Right. So we're all agreed he's brilliant. So a brilliant man does not say the opposite of what he actually believes. And he said to us clearly on camera that America preemptively struck in Iran because Israel had told them that they were going to attack Iran, and they knew that if that happened, Iran would attack American interests. So they got in first. Then
that's a question of timing. That's a question of timing.
Yeah, but it's also a question
I agree
of
with you that timing was determined.
It's a question of who's.
Well,
but
it's
also about who's putting the strings.
That's the oldest anti-Semitic trope in history, that Israel's pulling, that the Jews are pulling the strings. Nobody tells Trump what to do. Trump decides what to do. What Israel said and what the United States together said is we have intelligence that all these people are meeting in the same place, so this is the time to do it. But the United States and Donald Trump did not start a war based on Israel's interest. They started a war based on American interests. Jews comprise 2% of the American population, half of whom don't even support Israel. Muslims and Arabs are 1.3%. Trump complains, and to me he complains. Why don't Jews vote for me? I'm so good. Why don't they vote for me? Trump doesn't go to war in order to satisfy Israel's legitimate interests rather than the legitimate interests of the United States. Of course, it's part of Netanyahu's job to persuade President Trump that it's in Israel's interest and the United States' interest to try to decapitate and to destroy Iran. They are an existential threat to America's interests and to America's allies. There was miscalculation. They are stronger and more determined than anybody thought. And the Gulf of Hormuz, by the way, the answer to the Gulf of Hormuz is that there have to be ways of circumventing the Gulf of Hormuz and of having an oil supply. We cannot end this war allowing Iran to maintain control over what is now an important waterway. It should cease to be an important waterway, which is why I have urged right from the beginning that the United States must control the straits and say to Iran, look, either everybody goes through or no one goes through. That was the message I sent in my op-ed. That's what I told people in the White House. Iran can't be in control. And the end of this war may be that the Gulf of Hormuz will be closed to everybody, and we'll have to figure out other ways of getting the oil to Asia. That will be a good thing.
That will be a total disaster for everybody. But I'd also make a wider point, Alan, which is
I don't think so.
One of the reasons I think that Israel's been getting increasingly unpopular is because anyone that dares to criticize the Israeli government, and I stand by my suggestion that Benjamin Netanyahu has been pulling some strings with Trump because he managed to persuade the fourth American president. Well, let me finish my point. And I think I should be allowed to use that phrase. I should be allowed to use that phrase without you calling me anti-Semitic.
I don't think so.
I think you know I'm not anti-Semitic.
No, I'm not. By the way, I would never call you anti-Semitic. You're a friend of the Jews. You're a friend of Israel. What I'm telling you is something historical, that the phrase pulling the strings is a trope, and it shouldn't be used. And I wish you would use other terms. Put pressure, that's fine. Pulling the strings, having a puppet, that should not be permitted. I like you very much, and I support you all the time, but I criticize you for using that term. Please don't use that term. It's historic. No, it depends. It reminds too much.
It depends
of what other people who have different motives would say.
Alan, it actually depends if people are actually pulling strings, and I do think Netanyahu's been doing that. Let me bring in Joe Kent. I mean, Joe Kent, this is one of the more unsavory. Well, I'll use the term I feel is appropriate. Joe Kent, I mean, this idea that
I'll criticize you for it.
Terms.
And I'll criticize you for it. You can say what you want, and I can say what I want. That's what the open marketplace of ideas is all about.
100%. We are, especially on a show like Uncensored. You're entitled to your opinion.
We agree to disagree.
About the use of a phrase. I'm entitled to it too. Yeah. Joe Kent.
That's right.
I do believe that there's been enormous pressure, Joe Kent, from Benjamin Netanyahu to literally try and dictate what America would do. And I think he did it. He tried to do it with Obama. He tried to do it with Joe Biden, and he failed. We know that from Antony Blinken, who told us that he tried, and both times the American president said, I'm not coming with you if you attack Iran, and Israel did not attack Iran in either eventuality. So we know that here he found a president that would go along with it. And it's turned into, I think, a bit of a disaster here. What is your reading of that?
Yeah, I would more accurately describe it as a echo chamber that was created around President Trump. So what the Israelis do a very effective job of is they do punch way above their weight class. The Israelis, and this is on us, this is on the U.S. government's, this is our fault, we give them more access than they should have, than any foreign country should have. So what I witnessed over the last year was official engagements from members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, the Israeli government, come and have official engagements with members of our government and say things like Iran can't have any enrichment. The policy has to be zero enrichment, when in fact President Trump had just said the policy was no nuclear weapon. And you'll see President Trump echo that in his talking points now. And the former Supreme Leader, before we killed him, agreed with that. And that got both President Trump and the Supreme Leader to the negotiating table. And so for almost a year, we saw constructive negotiations between us and the Iranian government. This was a direct threat to the Israelis. The Israelis told us this much. The Mossad director, David Barnea, specifically said that their goal was regime change in Iran. They weren't very shy about that whatsoever. And so they used their access through official channels through official channels to circumvent the intelligence community, because anytime that the Israelis said the Iranians are 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon, they're making a nuclear weapon, the U.S. intelligence community, we would go and we would do our due diligence, we would check that, and we would find that the Iranian internal prohibition on developing a nuclear weapon was still holding. As a matter of fact, the Iranians were also withholding their proxies from attacking us as well. That's what the U.S. intelligence community agreed on. DNI Gabbard testified to that publicly twice in front of Congress. The Israelis, though, used their influence to circumvent the intelligence channels, and then they also had their surrogates within the media come and echo to President Trump via Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and say, hey, the red line is zero enrichment. And they said it enough, they made it repetitive enough through multiple avenues that President Trump was led to believe that his red line has to be zero enrichment. To take the issue off the table, we conducted Midnight Hammer. We totally obliterated their ability to enhance and enrich uranium. But then the Israelis came right back and said, hey, no, there's still more uranium there. You have to go in and physically get it. You have to control it, because the goal for the Israelis at that point was still regime change. And so they used their outsized influence on our government to drive this war. And when they thought they weren't going to get the war, they then said, we're going to go in, we're going to conduct attacks against the Iranians. We're going to target their supreme leader, which we knew from studying the intelligence and Iranian doctrine over the last several decades would result in the Iranians then attacking our bases in the region. So Marco Rubio was 100% accurate when he said there was no imminent attack against us being planned by the Iranians. The only thing that was imminent was the Israelis conducting that attack. That drove us into this conflict. And that should make every American take pause and think, what is our relationship with this country of Israel? Why are we letting them drive us into yet another war in the Middle East? How vital is it that we have control over the Straits of Hormuz?
Well, also, I mean, Alan, before you respond to Israel, Alan, hang on 1 second.
Sure.
Hang on, but before you respond, I want to play. I think it's a good time to play the Rahm Emanuel comments on the Bill Maher show on Friday, which were very interesting about why he believes.
And that's where this debate leaves people with very different conclusions. One of the biggest points of disagreement is where the line should be drawn between criticizing the policies of the Israeli government and making broader accusations about Israel or Jewish people. That's a distinction that often becomes the center of heated political discussions. The other major issue raised here is Donald Trump's foreign policy. Some critics argue that his decisions regarding the conflict involving Iran departed from his campaign promise to avoid new overseas conflicts, while supporters contend that his actions were driven by national security considerations. Those competing views continue to divide both conservatives and liberals alike. What's also notable is that disagreements over these issues aren't just happening between political parties. They've emerged within Trump's own coalition, with some prominent conservative voices questioning aspects of his foreign policy. That alone shows how complex and contentious this debate has become. Ultimately, these are important issues that deserve serious discussion, based on evidence rather than assumptions. What do you think? Did Alan Dershowitz make the stronger case, or did Joe Kent raise the more convincing arguments? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.